Four men walked into a heavily guarded Nazi airfield, and within minutes, dozens of aircraft were destroyed. Not with bombs, not with machine guns, but with something so small, the Germans didn't even realize what was happening until it was too late. How did a handful of soldiers cripple an entire airbase without firing a single shot? To understand that, we need to go back to North Africa, 1941, when a brand new unit called the Special Air Service was about to attempt something almost impossible. In 1941, the North African desert had become one of the most dangerous battlefields of the Second World War. Across hundreds of miles of open sand, British and German forces fought a relentless struggle for control. Supply lines stretched across empty desert roads, armored columns clashed in sudden battles, and above it all, aircraft constantly circled the skies. For the British forces fighting in North Africa, German air power was a constant threat. From their desert airfields, German bombers and fighters could strike Allied convoys, destroy supply trucks, and attack soldiers moving across the open sands. Every successful air raid weakened the Allied position and strengthened the enemy's grip on the region. Stopping those aircraft was critical. But there was a problem. Most of the German airfields were located deep inside territory controlled by Axis forces. They were protected by guards, anti-aircraft guns, and miles of empty desert that made surprise attacks extremely difficult. The traditional solution would have been to launch large bombing raids, but bombing missions were dangerous and expensive. Bombers had to fly long distances across hostile territory, and many were shot down before they ever reached their targets. Even when bombs hit the airfields, the results were often uncertain. Aircraft could be repaired, runways could be rebuilt, the enemy would simply return to the skies. What the British needed was something far more precise. Instead of attacking the airfields from the air, someone would have to reach them from the ground. And that meant traveling deep behind enemy lines. The idea sounded almost impossible, but one officer believed it could work. His name was David Stirling. Stirling was tall, unconventional, and known for questioning traditional military thinking. He believed the war in the desert was being fought the wrong way. Large armies moved slowly. They were predictable. The enemy always knew where they were coming from. Stirling believed a much smaller force could cause far greater damage. Instead of thousands of soldiers, he imagined small teams of just a few men, highly trained, moving quickly across the desert, striking unexpected targets before disappearing again into the night. Their mission would be simple in theory, but incredibly dangerous in practice. They would infiltrate enemy airfields on foot. Then, one by one, they would destroy the aircraft parked on the ground. No large battles, no massive assaults, just silent sabotage carried out in the darkness. Many officers dismissed Stirling's idea as reckless, but eventually he convinced the British command to allow him to create a small experimental unit. That unit became known as the Special Air Service, or SAS. At first, it consisted of only a handful of volunteers. They trained in desert navigation, sabotage, and infiltration. Their goal was to become invisible in the vast emptiness of North Africa. But even the most daring plans rarely survived their first mission. And when the SAS launched their very first operation, the desert itself would nearly destroy them. Because before four men ever managed to destroy dozens of enemy aircraft, the SAS had to survive a disaster that almost ended the unit before it truly began. In November 1941, the newly formed Special Air Service prepared for its first real test. The plan was bold. Dozens of SAS soldiers would parachute deep behind enemy lines in the North African desert. From there, they would travel on foot to nearby German airfields and destroy as many aircraft as possible before slipping back into the darkness. If it worked, the raid could prove that small sabotage teams were capable of crippling enemy air power. But from the very beginning, the mission was plagued with danger. The desert night was unpredictable, and the weather could change rapidly. High winds and violent sandstorms were common, turning the sky into a chaotic battlefield of its own. Despite these risks, the operation moved forward. transport aircraft lifted off into the darkness, carrying the SAS teams toward their drop zones far behind enemy lines. Inside the aircraft, the soldiers waited in silence. Each man carried explosives, supplies, and the weight of a mission that no one had attempted before. They knew that once they jumped, there would be no easy way back. Then the weather turned. As the aircraft approached the drop zone, a powerful desert storm swept across the area. Strong winds slammed against the planes, tossing them through violent turbulence. Visibility dropped. The ground below disappeared into swirling clouds of sand and darkness. But the jump order had already been given. One by one, the soldiers stepped out into the night. Almost immediately, things began to go wrong. The powerful winds scattered the parachutists across miles of desert. Some landed far from their intended targets. Others were thrown violently against the ground. Equipment was lost in the darkness. Explosives vanished beneath drifting sand. Several soldiers were injured on landing, and some never made it back at all. Instead of a coordinated sabotage raid, the mission collapsed into confusion and survival. Small groups of SAS soldiers now found themselves stranded deep in enemy territory, with limited supplies and no clear path to their targets. Many were forced to abandon the mission entirely and attempt the long journey back across the desert. For the young SAS unit, the operation was a disaster. The raid had failed before it had truly begun. But sometimes failure forces new ideas. Among those observing the mission was an officer who understood the desert better than almost anyone alive. A man who commanded a unique group of soldiers known as the Long-Range Desert Group. Instead of parachuting into the desert, he believed there was a far better way to reach the enemy. And that idea would soon allow small teams of SAS soldiers to travel hundreds of miles behind enemy lines and walk directly into heavily defended airfields. The next raid would look very different, and this time the Germans would have. After the failed parachute operation, the SAS needed a new way to reach enemy territory. Parachuting into the desert had proven too unpredictable. The wind could scatter soldiers across miles of sand, destroy equipment, and leave teams isolated without supplies or backup. The solution came from an unlikely partner. The Long-Range Desert Group, or LRDG, specialized in desert navigation and deep reconnaissance missions. Unlike conventional military units, the LRDG operated in small truck patrols that could travel hundreds of miles across the desert without detection. Their vehicles were modified for extreme conditions. Extra fuel tanks allowed them to travel far beyond normal supply limits. Weapons were mounted directly onto the trucks. Navigation equipment helped them move silently through vast, featureless sand landscapes. To the SAS, the LRDG trucks became the perfect infiltration tool. Instead of jumping blindly into enemy territory, SAS teams would now ride secretly across the desert, hidden inside or alongside the reconnaissance patrols. Under the cover of night, the trucks would approach German airfields from unexpected directions, stopping far from the actual targets. From there, the soldiers would continue on foot. The desert night became their ally. Darkness provided concealment, and the empty landscape allowed small groups to move without being easily spotted. The plan was simple. Drive deep behind enemy lines, approach the airfield quietly, carry explosives toward parked aircraft, attach the charges, then retreat before the enemy realized what was happening. The key weapon in these raids was a small but devastating incendiary device called the Lewis bomb. Despite its size, the bomb was capable of igniting aircraft fuel tanks and starting fires that could spread rapidly across tightly parked airfields. What made the weapon especially effective was its simplicity. A soldier could carry several of these devices during a raid. If placed correctly, a single man could potentially destroy multiple aircraft in one night. The Germans were confident that their airfields were secure. Searchlights scanned perimeter fences, machine gun positions guarded key entry points, patrols moved regularly around the aircraft parking areas. But the desert itself made defense difficult. The airfields were often isolated, surrounded by open sand that provided little natural protection. and the Germans were not yet aware that a new kind of warfare was beginning. A war fought not with large armies or aerial bombardment, but with silence, speed, and the patience of small teams operating in darkness. Soon, 4 men would attempt something that seemed completely impossible. They would walk directly into a heavily guarded airfield and destroy aircraft one by one without firing a single shot. In the winter of 1941, one of the most daring raids of the Desert War was about to begin. A small SAS team, only 4 men, prepared to approach a German airfield under the cover of darkness. The mission was not to fight a battle. Their objective was far more unconventional. They were there to destroy enemy aircraft silently, using sabotage rather than open combat. The team traveled across the desert with help from the Long-Range Desert Group, whose trucks carried the soldiers close to the target before stopping miles away from the airfield. From that point, the 4 men continued on foot. The desert night was cold and silent. The vast emptiness of North Africa worked in their favor. Sound carried strangely across the sand, and darkness offered cover from searchlights scanning the airfield perimeter. Each soldier carried several Lewis bomb charges. The plan was simple, but extremely risky. They would sneak past outer defenses, reach the parked aircraft, and attach the explosive devices in locations where fuel tanks were most vulnerable. Then they would move to another aircraft and repeat the process. Speed was critical. If guards detected them, the small team would have almost no chance against a full airfield security force. The 4 men moved quietly between rows of aircraft, staying low and avoiding patrol lights whenever possible. One by one, the charges were placed. Minutes felt like hours. Every sound, a footstep on sand, a distant engine, the movement of a guard's flashlight could mean discovery. When the last bomb was positioned, the team withdrew into the desert darkness. Then they waited. After a short time, the explosives ignited. Fire spread across the parked aircraft, feeding on fuel and metal structures that had been carefully targeted. Panic erupted inside the airfield as German personnel rushed to respond to the unexpected attack. But the attackers were already disappearing into the desert night. There were no firefights, no large-scale assault, just silence, darkness, and sudden destruction delivered by a handful of soldiers. The raid proved something revolutionary. Small, highly trained teams could strike far behind enemy lines and inflict serious damage without engaging in traditional battlefield combat. The Germans had built strong defenses against large attacks, but they were not prepared for enemies who moved quietly through the desert, struck quickly, and vanished before dawn. The operation became one of the earliest demonstrations of modern special forces sabotage tactics, and it would not be the last time the SAS would target enemy airfields, because the success of this raid encouraged further missions, where even fewer soldiers would attempt to achieve even greater destruction. Some of the most legendary operations would be carried out by groups so small that they seemed impossible to believe. Sometimes, only The success of the desert airfield raids marked a turning point in the history of modern warfare. The operations carried out by the Special Air Service demonstrated that small, highly trained teams could achieve strategic effects that were once only possible through large-scale military attacks. Traditional warfare had relied heavily on mass armies, artillery, and air bombardment, but the desert raids showed something different. Speed mattered, surprise mattered, adaptation to terrain mattered. Instead of fighting directly against enemy forces, the SAS focused on targeting infrastructure that supported the enemy's ability to wage war. Airfields were especially valuable targets because aircraft were critical to desert operations. Destroying planes on the ground removed the enemy's ability to respond quickly to Allied movements, sometimes shifting local air superiority in favor of the attackers. The tactics developed during these missions influenced special operations units around the world. Modern special forces groups would later adopt similar principles, small team infiltration, precision sabotage, and rapid withdrawal before enemy forces could organize a response. The legacy of the desert raids extended far beyond the North African campaign. What began as a controversial idea proposed by David Sterling eventually helped shape the future of unconventional warfare. Today, special forces units across many countries continue to use variations of these tactics in counterterrorism, reconnaissance, and strategic operations. The story of 4 men destroying enemy aircraft without firing a single shot became more than just a wartime legend. It became a demonstration of how warfare was beginning to change, not through sheer numbers, but through intelligence, planning, and the power of small, determined teams. In the vast silence of the North African desert, a new kind of soldier had emerged, one who did not always seek open battle, but who could strike decisively when opportunity appeared, and sometimes vanish before the enemy even